guitar fragments still scattered across the stage. Pete Townshend standing in triumph. Then Jimi Hendrix bent down, picked up a piece, and did something Pete had never seen in 10 years of performing. The Monterey Pop Festival. June 18, 1967. A warm California evening that would redefine what rock and roll could be. The Who had just finished their set. Pete Townshend had smashed his guitar into pieces. The climax of their performance, the moment audiences waited for, the violent punctuation that said the Who were not here to be polite. The stage floor was littered with destruction. Splintered wood. Broken strings. Fragments of what had been a perfectly good Rickenbacker guitar reduced to kindling in a performance of controlled rage. Pete stood backstage, chest heaving, adrenaline coursing through him, feeling that post-destruction high that made all the preparation and expense worth it. Roger Daltrey was laughing. Keith Moon was already talking about what he'd destroy next. John Entwistle was quietly packing his bass. The crowd was still screaming. "That's how you close a set," Pete said to no one in particular, wiping sweat from his face with a towel someone handed him. "That's how you make them remember." The stage manager approached. "Jimi Hendrix is up next." Pete nodded. He'd heard of Hendrix. Everyone had heard of Hendrix by that point. The guitarist making waves in London, the American expat who played guitar in ways that seemed to defy physics. But Pete wasn't worried. The Who had just delivered a nuclear bomb of a performance. Whatever Hendrix did, he'd be following destruction itself. "Should we clean the stage?" the stage manager asked, gesturing to the guitar debris. "Leave it," Pete said, a slight smirk on his face. "Let him work around it." Jimi Hendrix walked past Pete in the wings. He was dressed in his performance clothes, bright, psychedelic, impossibly cool. He carried his Stratocaster. He didn't look at Pete. Didn't acknowledge the Who's performance. Didn't seem concerned about the wreckage waiting for him on stage. He just walked forward with that unhurried grace he always carried, like he had all the time in the world and knew exactly how he'd use it. Pete watched him go, that smirk still on his face. "Good luck following that, mate," he muttered. And then Jimi Hendrix stepped onto the stage. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. The crowd's energy shifted immediately. The screaming continued but changed quality, anticipation replacing the post-Who frenzy. Jimi walked to center stage, stepping carefully around the guitar fragments without looking down, as if he knew exactly where each piece lay. He reached the microphone. Stood there for a moment. Silent. Just holding his guitar, looking out at the crowd with that slight, knowing smile. Then he looked down. At the largest piece of Pete's destroyed guitar, part of the body, still recognizable as having once been an instrument. It lay directly in front of the mic stand. Jimi bent down. The crowd quieted slightly, confused. Was he going to throw it? Kick it aside? Make some comment about the Who's theatrics? Jimi picked up the guitar fragment gently. With both hands. Like it was something precious that deserved care despite being broken. He held it for a moment, turning it over, examining the splintered wood, the broken strings still attached, the violence frozen in the wreckage. Then he did something no one expected. He set it down carefully to the side of the stage. Not thrown. Not discarded. Placed. With the same reverence you'd use for an intact instrument. He picked up another piece. Did the same thing. And another. And another. Jimi Hendrix, scheduled to play a revolutionary set that would change rock music forever, was cleaning up someone else's mess. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some confused murmurs. Scattered applause. Mostly just silence as 15,000 people watched a guitarist they'd come to see perform instead quietly gather broken pieces of wood. Backstage, Pete Townshend had been heading to the dressing room. Something made him stop. He turned back. Walked to the wing where he could see the stage. And he watched Jimi Hendrix pick up every single fragment of his destroyed guitar. "What's he doing?" Roger asked, appearing beside Pete. Pete couldn't answer. He was staring at the stage with an expression he couldn't quite name. Something between confusion and the first uncomfortable stirrings of shame. Jimi finished clearing the debris. The stage was clean. He walked back to the microphone, picked up his Stratocaster, and began to play. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. What happened next entered rock history. Jimi Hendrix played a set so transcendent, so revolutionary, that it eclipsed everything that had come before. He ended by setting his own guitar on fire, not in destruction, not in rage, but in sacrifice. An offering. A transformation. But that's not what Pete Townshend remembered. Years later, decades later, until the day he died, what Pete remembered was watching Jimi Hendrix bend down and pick up those guitar pieces with a gentleness that made Pete's entire performative destruction feel suddenly, horribly small. The true story of what happened after the festival. 3 days later. A small rehearsal space in San Francisco. The Who were working on new material before heading back to England. Pete was running through a guitar part, frustrated with how it was sounding, when someone knocked on the door. Jimi Hendrix stood in the doorway. Alone. No entourage. No fanfare. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said quietly. "Heard you guys were here. Wanted to talk." The Who's rehearsal stopped. Keith Moon made some joke. Roger looked confused. John said nothing. Pete stood there holding his guitar, face flushed, suddenly feeling like a child called to the headmaster's office though he couldn't say why. "About what?" Pete managed. "About guitars," Jimi said, stepping into the room. He was carrying something, a small wooden box. "About what we do with them." He opened the box. Inside were the fragments Pete had destroyed on stage. Jimi had kept them. "Why do you have those?" Pete asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Jimi didn't answer directly. Instead, he picked up one of the pieces. The neck snapped cleanly at the 7th fret. He ran his fingers along the break. "This was a good guitar before you killed it," Jimi said. His voice wasn't accusatory. Wasn't judgmental. Just stated fact. "Rickenbacker. Nice action. Probably played beautiful. It's just a guitar," Pete said defensively. "Just wood and wire. We destroy them because—" "I know why you do it," Jimi interrupted gently. "Rebellion. Rage against the machine. Making a statement about disposability and art and all that." He set the neck fragment down carefully. "But here's what I learned." He looked directly at Pete. Those eyes. Completely present. Completely unguarded. The guitar didn't do anything to you. It was trying to help you make music. And you punished it for, what? For the audience? For the image? The room was silent. Keith had stopped fidgeting. Roger was listening. John was watching Pete's face. "Smashing a guitar is easy," Jimi continued. "Takes what, 10 seconds? But making a guitar sing, making it say something true, that takes everything you have. Every hour you've practiced. Every emotion you've learned to channel. Every piece of your soul you're willing to offer. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding." Pete felt something crack open inside him. Not anger. Something worse. Recognition. "When I saw you destroy that guitar," Jimi said, "I saw someone who was afraid." "Afraid?" Pete's voice rose. "I'm not afraid of not being enough," Jimi said simply. "Afraid that just playing won't be sufficient. That you need the theatrics because the music alone won't hold them." The words hung in the air like smoke. "I picked up those pieces," Jimi continued, "because I wanted you to see something. I wanted to show you what you're really destroying isn't the guitar. It's the possibility that you might be enough without the destruction." He reached into the box again and pulled out something Pete hadn't noticed, a small notebook. Jimi opened it. Inside were photographs. Jimi as a child, holding his first guitar. A beat-up acoustic that looked like it had survived a war. This guitar. Jimmy said, pointing to the photo. Came from a pawn shop. Cost my dad $7 he didn't have. I learn every chord I know on this guitar. When I finally could afford a better one, you know what I did? Pete shook his head. I kept it. Because it helped me become who I am. It was a partner. Not a prop. Jimmy closed the notebook. He placed it on top of the guitar fragments. You can keep destroying guitars if you want, he said. That's your choice. But I'm asking you to consider something else. What if you trusted the music enough to let it speak without the violence? Pete's hands were shaking. He gripped his guitar tighter, not even aware he was doing it. I don't. Pete started, then stopped. I don't know if I can. I know, Jimmy said. And there was such compassion in his voice that it almost hurt. But you could try. Just once. Just see what happens if you let the last note ring instead of destroying it. He walked to the door. Stopped. Turned back. Keep the fragments, Jimmy said. Remind yourself of what you're willing to break. And then decide if it's worth it. He left. The door closed. The 4 members of the Who stood in silence. Keith Moon spoke first. Well, that was heavy. But Pete wasn't listening. He was staring at the wooden box Jimmy had left behind. At the fragments of his destroyed Rickenbacker. At the notebook with the photograph of a child holding a $7 guitar like it was made of gold. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. Pete Townshend did not immediately stop destroying guitars. That became part of the Who's legacy, their signature, their statement. But something changed after that conversation. He started waiting longer. The destruction became the exception rather than the rule. Some concerts ended with guitar smashing. Many more ended with Pete simply setting his guitar down carefully, letting the final chord sustain, trusting the music to be enough. In interviews decades later, Pete would talk about that day in the rehearsal space. About Jimi Hendrix teaching him something about respect, not respect for authority or tradition, but respect for the tools that help you create. Jimmy showed me, Pete said in a 1994 interview, that real power isn't in destruction. It's in creation. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust that what you've made is sufficient. The fragments Jimmy left, those pieces of the destroyed Rickenbacker, Pete kept them. For years they sat in a box in his home studio. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. In 2010, Pete donated them to a music museum with a note. These pieces represent the moment I learned the difference between performing destruction and creating art. Keep them so people remember. Jimi Hendrix never needed to raise his voice or smash a guitar to prove he was the greatest. He just played. And that was enough. Jimi Hendrix died 3 years after Monterey. He never spoke publicly about that conversation in the rehearsal space. It remained private. A gift given without needing acknowledgement or credit. But the Who changed. Subtly. Slowly. And Pete never forgot. Years later, a young guitarist asked Pete why he still destroyed guitars sometimes. Pete thought for a long moment. Because I haven't fully learned what Jimmy tried to teach me that day, he said. But I'm still trying. The fragments still sit in that museum. Next to them, a placard reads simply, some lessons are taught without words. Some masters teach by example. Jimi Hendrix picked up broken pieces and showed us what respect looks like. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The greatest act of rebellion isn't destruction. It's the courage to believe your art is enough without it. Jimi Hendrix proved that every time he played. He never needed to break anything. He just needed to be present, honest, and willing to let the music speak. That's the difference between a showman and a master.